I want to say thanks for being here. I'm Lisa Loving. This is Report the Vote, workshop number 9, personal safety. It's brought to you by the Pacifica Affiliate Network and WNUC LPFM in Detroit and Pacifica. In this workshop, we cover crucial reporting skills, but this is just one episode of a series, and look for the others online. We're putting them up one at a time, and it's at pacificanetwork.org/report the vote news training. And so I have a couple of special notes too, and you probably already heard them. So if you're working on election coverage, I'm going to head up a new twice monthly national radio show designed to carry your reporting. And if you want your reporting to reach a national audience, if you maybe want a little help with it, a little support, send me an email. And we're starting at the end of this month, and it's pretty exciting. Here, let me just add my email to the chat. I'm going to do it really quick. Meeting group chat. And also, oops, that's not how you spell it. And also, I have my journalism book. And if you've been coming to these trainings, you know I've been waiting to send them out because I want to get more people who want one. But I wrote this book. It was published about 5 years ago by a wonderful Portland local press. And I think it turned out really well. And if you send me your snail mail address, I'll send you one for free. Reclaiming Orange for the People. Anyway, all right. And those are just notes. Okay. Personal safety. And I saw what happened, between the last time I saw you guys, something predictable maybe, but something momentous happened with the elections that kind of changes the whole trajectory of what's going on in a way. And it attempted assassination of DJT is now going to turn up the heat on protests, street actions, things like that. So if you missed last week's workshop about covering protests, that's one of my favorite workshops. And I also sent Stephanie the long slideshow that goes with it. There's a lot to know. And you can do all of it. You can do it all. Okay. All right. Personal safety. I've always thought that journalists, cops, and attorneys, everybody hates us unless they desperately need us, right? The threat in the United States against reporters is real. The physical threat, the threat of violence. Violence comes from random people in public spaces, and it also comes from law enforcement. And cyberbullies now have the power of artificial intelligence. I have broken this workshop down into 2 parts. I've got cyber threats, and then I've got physical violence, but they don't really easily fit into 2 separate buckets, but I'm still going to try to do that. And I think too, troubleshooting when something goes wrong with your work fits into this bucket, but it's too much. I had originally had a whole section that was about what's called crisis communications. What happens if something goes wrong and somebody just accuses you of something that damages your reputation that potentially does that? There's actually a brilliant way of handling that. And I'm including a link in the PDF that for today's workshop to the best hub of information about crisis communications. And I know that sounds nutty, but just let me say briefly, KBOO had a terrible, I'm from KBOO Community Radio in Portland, Oregon. KBOO had a terrible scandal a couple of years ago, and that scandal's not over. And a pedophile actually committed crimes in adjacent to the radio station, and it's horrible. And that was a thing. Now KBOO created a crisis communications plan. The development director did that. But I created one for myself too, because I knew I was going to go talk into a microphone and people might accuse me of something or accuse KBOO of something. So it's really worth looking up. And just like with a lot of the other stuff that we're going to talk about today, it's just a matter of planning it. And planning is just taking some kind of document and just writing information on it. It's not too much work, and it will save you a lot of work in the long run. The whole thing makes me feel anxious just talking with you about it. But the other thing that's most important for you to know about personal safety is that we as journalists are stronger when we organize professionally and build relationships with each other. We're stronger when we do that. We're doing that right now, okay? But when you go and cover the RNC, the DNC, you might meet other journalists. Make relationships with them, okay? Because the most important takeaway you'll have from this workshop is that your community is the only force that can protect you when things go wrong. Your professional community and your local audience, your local community of listeners or readers or viewers. In doing what you do, you're building community, even just by broadcasting, right? It's important to keep this front of mind when you're doing this work. And when I say that you need to be relational and not transactional, when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with them for the long term. You're not just trading them something for something. When I say to be relational, this goes to the heart of why that's important. Because journalists cause trouble. We cause trouble. Sometimes that's even our job, right? But there's ways that you can be prepared. Okay. Cyber threats. You could experience a ransomware attack. Your website might be hacked. You might get a violent threat or multiple violent threats. My first tip is take a little time to think in advance about what could happen, right? And write it down. What do you think could possibly happen? You might have a pretty good sense of what you worry the most about, right? So make a plan in advance for how to respond to each of the things on your list before they happen. It's not putting negativity into the universe at all. It's not. It's helping you keep your anxiety in check when you're going into a situation when you can't control what's happening around you, honestly. And when I say make a plan in advance and write it down or document it so that other people can follow it if need be. You might be one journalist, but you might be a journalist in a team. You might be one journalist going out to cover some convention or some campaign event, but you certainly have someone back at the radio station who is also part of your team, right? If something happens to you, you want somebody else to be able to come up and pick up what you're doing. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's not. And it might be, you know, something, whatever happens to you might be something really simple. I already talked about the street protests that happened in Portland, Oregon in 2020. 2 KBOO reporters were arrested. And the station managers went down in the middle of the night to bail them out, right? It could be something as banal as just getting arrested. And of course, all the charges were dropped. Of course they were. They always are in Portland, right? So when I say write down what you worry about and then come up with a 1-sentence plan for how to deal with it, it can be as simple as cyber attack. Call Joe, the tech guy, who is the official dedicated emergency tech. It can be as simple as that, right? Call Joe, the tech guy. Or you're getting a bomb threat. Everyone exits the office with personal gear and meets up across the street in the Clown Theater parking lot. KBOO actually is across the street from a Clown Theater, for real. While the station manager calls authorities, something like that, right? I know this seems like a stupid detail, but it's not, because when emergencies happen, you're going to be overwhelmed. But if you literally just have even just an index card of phone numbers, phone number for the tech guy, right? Phone number for the station manager. I already said this. If you're going to a protest, you should have whoever's going to bail you out of jail, that person's number written on your arm with a Sharpie pen. If it's the station manager, sure. If it's your mom, maybe that's the best you can do, but write her phone number down. And also look up the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild has a toll-free phone number, and they will support you, right? That's what they do. We talked about this in how to cover protests last week, but whatever it is, write it down. have a really simple plan. If you put it on a piece of paper with phone numbers, you're not being paranoid, you're being prepared. And the thing that I'm going to put this out, and this sounds nutty too, but it keeps you from harm, but it also keeps you from overreacting. Sometimes overreacting or reacting to the wrong thing is what messes you up. So if you know you have a plan and you have phone numbers, maybe you've even lodged it with your station manager or your news director, it really makes a difference. Because when you're at these campaign events, sometimes if something happens, there's intense chaos and high emotions, right? And if you have it written down, you can share it with someone. You can know that it's there and you have what you need. Write it down, visualize yourself carrying it out, and own it. Own it, right? If you take the hour to do most of these tasks, when the crisis hits, you're going to be glad. And I want to tell you about a resource. I don't know if you've ever heard of this amazing woman named Michelle Ferrier. Michelle Ferrier is the founder of a nonprofit called Troll Busters. Troll Busters, what is it? Trollbusters.com, I think. It's a service to help vulnerable journalists, especially women, people of color, and LGBTQI2 reporters who are targeted by online harassment. On her website, she actually has a form you can fill out. If you're having harassment right now, she can help. Troll Busters. You should look her up because she's an amazing person. And she created this resource because it happened to her. She was getting violent threats. Her newspaper didn't support her. And she wound up packing up her entire family and moving away. Right? It's dangerous to do what we do. Okay, I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to shift gears to physical violence. Doesn't that sound great? We just talked about how cyber criminality and physical violence can be linked. And I mean it strongly, that your newsroom, your news director and your reporters should keep a record of violent threats that come in via digital media. Don't expect somebody else is going to do that. You do it, right? Do it in your newsroom. This include dates, times, every who, what, when, where, how, and why that you can think of, because this can help later in a legal situation. Where I live in Portland, Oregon, it's actually these people called Patriot Prayer and these other people called the Proud Boys, which actually they're the real heart of the violent, dangerous harassment in my town. But they get sued by people and they lose. So keep a record of that stuff. If something bad happens, you can maybe help defend yourself and your colleagues. Yeah, a lot of people in your newsroom, in your radio station are just going to shrug this off because they don't want to deal with it. And some people, I'm going to say, perhaps your board of directors, might even feel the need to cover it up. Boards of directors of people, if they're tasked with guarding the fiduciary health of an institution, and sometimes their decision is to cover it up, right? But it's important to acknowledge this kind of situation so that your staff and volunteers feel supported. This one thing is really crucial. Instead of pretending it didn't happen and acting like it's normal. Also, I'm going to encourage you to decide in advance whether your team wants to report these to the authorities or not. We kind of talked about this in the protest workshop. At KBOO Community Radio, really, most people do not want to involve law enforcement because there's an assumption that an innocent person could be injured by law enforcement. But that had to be communicated to everyone, right? Because somebody's writing it down. So at KBOO, you know, the staff came up with a different procedure if there's a crisis. And they literally call an ambulance or the fire bureau instead of the police. But decide in advance if you're going to do that, because you might be in a space where there's some people who feel like a real mortal threat if law enforcement shows up. And that's not that they're not imagining that. So, right, decide in advance. But even if you don't report it to authorities, still keep a record of it. It's important for your own information, right? Now, this is a hard conversation. If you're part of a team reporting from an event or location, make a plan for how and where to meet up, especially if there are crowd control devices being deployed by law enforcement. Okay, tear gas, flash bang grenades, less lethal bullets, or beanbag rifles. Any of that constitutes crowd control weapons. And I want you guys to huddle together with your team and decide what you're going to do. Please do it. Right? Please do it. You know, I mean, where you live, maybe the protest culture is not as intense as it is in Portland, where the first George Bush actually called Portland Little Beirut because we had so many protests against Republicans. But the truth is, Donald Trump was president when all this stuff really went down. And he's the one who deployed BORTAC to the Portland protest, which was the Border Tactical Police hit squad that he created. So I want you to decide what you're going to do if chaos breaks out where you're reporting, because it's important. And make sure everybody knows what that plan is, okay? Yeah, where I live in Oregon, the most common form of violence that journalists face is from the police. There's this brilliant woman, April Ehrlich, and she works for public radio. And there were these wildfires in Southern Oregon that burned down an entire town. In fact, maybe two. And all the people that lived in those towns, they didn't have anywhere to go, rich and poor. So they all wound up in a parking lot in tents. April Ehrlich was with a group of police who were touring the encampment where all the people who, I mean, just survived a wildfire were camping. And for whatever reason, they decided that she wasn't following the rules. They didn't want her there. They didn't want her following them. And so they said to her, no, there's a media staging area around the corner. And she refused to go there. Okay, rightfully so. It's okay to cry. The police arrested her. They threw her in jail. They assaulted her in ways I don't want to talk about. And of course, later, all the charges were dropped. All the charges are almost always dropped, you guys. Okay. So I want to, again, decide in advance if you and your team plan to challenge authorities when they start kettling journalists in a separate location. That's called kettling. It's very common. This is how April Ehrlich did her job like a boss and was beaten and arrested by the police. In the end, she was hired by Oregon Public Broadcasting, and she had people come out of the woodwork to offer her help with legal. She sued the city of Medford and got a multi-million-dollar settlement because that's what happens. And that's why you want to write down everything that you're experiencing with dates, who, what, when, where, how, and why. Okay. Yeah, decide in advance if you and your team plan to challenge the authorities. If you decide to challenge the police's riot act designation, you're keeping in mind that a riot doesn't exist except that the police call something a riot. It is a police designation. If the police aren't there, people could be having a mob experience. But if the police don't actually read out the riot act, it's not a riot. So if you decide to challenge the police's riot act designation, this is a very specific thing. Figure out in advance what you're doing with any equipment you're carrying. Okay. Law enforcement loves to break the digital equipment of people in the media, loves it. So find out in advance, figure it out what you're going to do. You might even like designate a location to dump your material, like behind a shrub. I'm not even kidding. During the 2020 election, protests in Portland, 100 nights of demonstrations, right? People dealt with all this. It was stunning and staggering, and all the charges were dropped except for against a handful of people who actually did commit crimes. Figure out in advance what you're doing with any equipment you're carrying, especially memory chips from digital media. There are times when law enforcement or other people come up to you and demand the chip. I hope I'm not screwing anything up by saying people I know who covered the unrest in downtown Portland had dummy chips. They kept a dummy chip so that they could hand it to anyone who gave them a hard time and not lose their material. I know that sounds obscure, but it could happen. A dummy chip. I would have never thought of that. It was brilliant. Look out for the police and others who might want to try and break your equipment. Yeah, actually, I have to pull this out. I have to open up this link. NBC Universal, of all places, and I've got a link to this. They've got a brilliant article about how to protect yourself if you're a journalist, how to protect yourself from violence. And this is going to be in the PDF for today. One of the reasons why I think the police attacked so many reporters, and now in Portland, we just expect it. They attacked the daily newspaper reporters. They attacked the television reporters, right? Video of all of it. But I think that one of the reasons that they became so violent, law enforcement became so violent, is because they will say they can't tell reporters from everyday people. Okay. But a lot of the people that they attacked had
quick question.
Let me just finish my sentence. They had press passes and they had big placards on their chest that said press. So just keep aware of who you're standing near when you're in a situation of chaos and violence. Honestly, that's really what I have. I've got a ton of links for you guys, but I want to hear from you. What's going on, Brianna?
I just can't help but think, you've brought up several times how like police are harming reporters, and how you just mentioned how they can't tell the difference between a regular person and a reporter.
They say.
And why does that sound worse? Like it's somehow okay to do these things to regular people or to everyday people, but having a press pass is supposed to be like like a shield almost. So, but press people are also everyday people. They are. I mean, we are. And so I just can't help but think, like, why does that just sound even worse?
Right.
Like
I invite you to look up some of this coverage. Like I said, actually, incredible things happened here in 2020. And I think that in Portland, Oregon, and I think that the country, something happened. I mean, this expectation of violence against I mean, there was a squad of moms that were linking arms, and they had t-shirts that said moms, and they were linking arms around especially African-American people in the crowd and getting between the police. It's incredible. So this is about personal safety. And as we head into this chaotic situation, I have to suggest it's possible that street action, street chaos, it might not even be a protest. Sometimes things just happen and the riot police show up. I just want you to have some tips to control your material, not lose your equipment, and to make sure that you've got the support that you need. Okay. Yeah. And just this one last thing about cyber stalking, cyber threats, and the community around you, right? I was stalked and cyber threatened, I'll say, by this person who, well, I'm not going to get into who it was, but this person, actually, this is what they did. I happen to be on the board of the Society for Professional Journalists, the SPJ, which is just a local people in media. And we get together and we'd meet and we'd have like an event for students. That's what we did. So I knew, actually, it just happened that I knew all the people that ran all the newsrooms in town, right? And this guy wrote a letter to the editor, to every news leader, every news department, okay? And said, and pretended to be somebody else and said, I'm a KBOO listener, and Lisa Loving did a certain thing. She advocated for criminality on her Facebook page. And, I just don't understand what kind of person would do that. This chatty letter to try to, invent some absurd way to discredit me, right? He also sent one to me. Hello, I was the editor. It was like editor, the scanner.com. And when I got that email, I knew exactly who it was. I don't need to talk about that now. And I responded to it and said, hey, it's me, Lisa Loving. What's going on? Right. But what happened in the end was that I could see from the email who all had received a copy. And I reached out. It was 5 of us. I reached out, and it was the Alternative News Weekly. It was another community weekly. It was the daily newspaper, and it was one of these TV stations. And every one of these cases, the person said, Lisa, I know you. So I knew that this was fake, right? It's your community that'll be there to help you. And that's why you need to be relational. When you're relational, you have a source in the community who you're letting them know that they can share stories with you, and then you can get information from them. Relational means you probably have each other's cell phone numbers. Putting that out, don't have to, but it has a long-term impact. And some of these people that you're going to meet, some of your colleagues, you're going to know them forever, right? I know, I'm thinking of Brianna, like, starting a job, getting to know folks, you're going to know these people forever. You're going to meet teenagers that 10 years from now are running for office, because that's what happened to me in my career. And it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. That's one of the best parts of it. You're collating your community. You're building community to make your work better and to protect yourself. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna list off in this PDF that I have for today. This is really the most interesting and important information you should be checking out. And I found that in circles where people talk about journalism education and journalism training, it's these reporters organizations in other countries that do the best job, even though everything that they've talked about is happening here now. So I've got the link to Troll Busters. There's actually a World Press Freedom Index. Fascinating, 2024. There's a link to that. PEN America is a nonprofit think tanky organization that supports journalism. So the PEN America's Know Your Rights video. Even if you have the right to do something, it doesn't mean that the police are not going to hurt you or arrest you. Is also something important, but you should know your rights. And those rights also, we talked about this in the last workshop, I think. Rights change. So it's your job to stay on top of case law regarding what happens to protesters, because that's where that's adjudicated. It's case law. From Zimbabwe, there's this awesome elections reporting and peace journalism manual. Love that. The Committee for the Protection of Journalists. If you're facing violence, that's a fantastic resource. I believe that you can call them. I think you can get support from them too. And this is their safety kit. In last week's workshop, I also had links to the similar stuff getting ready for a protest, right? Yeah, and here's another for the Committee for the Protection of Journalists guidelines on covering protests over police violence that even came out with even different specific ones. And this is such a heavy topic. That's what I got. You guys, what are you thinking? What are you worried about when you go into your community? Yeah, go ahead.
I live in a very small town.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah,
And so I think the only thing that I'm actually worried about is verbal harassment. Uh, I don't know. I don't think I am in physical danger because again, it's a very small town. It's always a possibility. It's always a possibility, but uh, handling verbal harassment.
right? I wish I had a magic wand for you. I want you to breathe. And I don't know if you remember Katie Tur, T-U-R. Everybody hates on Katie Tur. She really is a Trump apologist. It's shocking. And she covered the Trump the original Trump election in 2015, 2016. And he actually called her out in his big events, his stadium events. He harassed her right in front of everyone and pointed out where she was. Right? So I'm just going to tell you to breathe. If it's someplace where you need to be, stay. If it's someplace that you can walk away from, walk away. It's also possible sometimes, well, and I want you to write down everything. Write down where it happened, when it happened, what that person looked like, what time, where it was located. I know it seems like a futile gesture, but this stuff can be important later. Like I said, the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer have actually gotten busted, and some of them have gone to jail because they did stuff like this and people documented it and sued them, right? Those are neo-Nazi organizations. Okay. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry about, and you should also text me. Did I give you my phone number? Somebody verbally harasses you, text me. I'll give you a pep talk. I'll hold your hand. That's true of anyone, right? And I want to say, I see you, Babette, but I feel like John had his hand up. What's going on, John?
Oh, just the same concern expressed earlier about whether we should identify ourselves as press or not. A couple of us bought it's like a blue vest and says press or media on it in big letters, but I would think that might make us more of a target.
Right. So let's unpack that for a second. Let's unpack that for a minute. I feel like the people in Portland who made the biggest statement about being reporters were concerned about police violence. And I mean, this just sounds so awful. If you don't feel safe, get the hell out of wherever you're at, right? I'm going to say, though, that some of the biggest payouts came from the police attacking people who were clearly marked as media. So here's a suggestion. You might, I don't know how big your team is. You might actually you might station people in different places. And it might be like, there's going to be campaign events like speeches that aside from, conventions in the state of Oregon where we live, there's going to be, Lane County Fair, Wazoo with J.D. Vance. Wow, that guy. That was rude. I didn't mean to. Right. So you're very likely to be in a situation that doesn't scream violence, right? Consider having one or two people wear the vest and having a couple of your reporters go plain clothes. But definitely keep something large about you that you can stick on yourself. Okay. Right. I hate to say that. I've been doing this since I was a child, you guys, and these are unusual days. Okay. Does that help at all? Okay. It's good that you're thinking about it in advance because you need to. Babette, what's going on?
Well, we have the Republican National Convention here, and our city is pretty much locked down. And it's very different from last time, 4 years ago, when the Democratic convention was here. There wasn't all that many people attending, for one. But the difference was that there were more protests, and the police came out in their riot gear and all that, and would confront the protesters. This time, there's a little less of that because you can't even get anywhere near to protest. They have the city so locked down, and there's so much barricades and checkpoints. I tried to get in to see the protest a couple of days ago, first night of the convention, and ended up running into all these protests, well, barriers to stop the protests, so barriers to stop anyone getting in. And they would search under your car, had me get out of the car, searched me, what's in the box you've got in the car. It's a bunch of newspapers and show us. And so I had to show them that. And, you know, they went through, looked through everything. And then they decided I needed to turn around and go back. They weren't even gonna let me through. So I tried another place. And at first the guy said I could go through. And then he says, no, I want you to back up. So
Because they
and he-
can, because they can. I'm sorry, go
because
ahead.
they can, yeah. And they said that they had emptied out the protest area earlier, and so that there's nothing really to see. I don't know if there wasn't anything to see because I never got in to see it, but it made it sound like they had emptied out all of downtown. That's it.
Okay, a couple things. Social media is an amazing place to see who were people who were at the scene, what images they took, right? I hate to suggest that people be on social media because it's bad for our health. I will say it's an incredible source of information. You can't always take that information at face value, but you might be able to find, I guess on Twitter, Instagram, there's also WhatsApp, specifically where people are pushing protest information out. I guess TikTok, like, yeah, all these things. And I know that this is not a convenient thing for me to say, but you can use social media to track what's going on in a breaking news situation. The other thing about that, and we talked about this at the protest, how to cover a protest, is that if you do get in, you have to be, if you get into a situation in these chaos situations and get amazing video, it's also possible that there's now a whole system of right-wing alternative newspapers, and they're all connected and they all carry the same material. So, and they hijack, they can hijack your video and then put anything on it they want. This guy, and I'll say this again, Andy Ngo, N-G-O, Andy Ngo. He's a Portlander. He's really famous for that. The other thing I want to say too about the police themselves, they're freaked out. They're scared. I always had to cover the cop shop, right? And that's where I learned that these guys are human beings, and some of them are going to lash out when they're afraid. They all hate their boss. I'm putting this out. They all might do what their boss says, but there's never been a cop that loved their boss ever. I'm saying that. So I'm going to, and this is terrible, but I'm going to encourage you to see them as people. They may not be seeing you as a person, but I'm encouraging you to do that. Because what happened in Portland in the end is that a bunch of these officers actually quit because they didn't want to be on the side of the police. They're people, and they might even be people that you live next to. They might be the people that live, you know, by the places that you go. I'm just going to strongly encourage you, if you can, to see them as human beings. But, you know, and for a situation like that, where everything is so locked down, depending on your team, sometimes it works if somebody's super motivated, to get them in there hella early or even the night before, right? If the police, if law enforcement, if the officials are locking everything down, you know, I think this is part of one of the reasons why people that ran the protests in Portland said, be like water. So years ago, and this is kind of like that, years ago, we imploded a nuclear plant here outside of Portland. And in the cable newsroom, we covered the implosion live. It was on a Sunday morning. And I had like 10 people wanted to go cover it, but they couldn't get in. They couldn't get anywhere near it, right? So people had to use their ingenuity. There's this group called the Cacophony Society or something like that. They had rented out the top floor of a hotel across the river from the implosion. And so one group of people just went to their party. They crashed the party. Another group of people, they sort of hiked in and, you know, found areas near there and hid, right? And I'm not saying ever to be lawless in how you cover things, but there was also a group of people with the Trojan implosion, as we called it, that went in the night before. And they had a tent and they did that. So yeah. And the one last thing I wanted to say is I wonder if you know someone with a drone, right? But Babette, I mean, I totally want to follow what you're doing. So keep me in the loop about what happens, okay? And Stephanie has her hand out up.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Thanks for y'all are great resources too. There's a lot of these I never heard of. This is a secondary issue that I'm thinking of right now, in regards to, I'm hearing that, safety is number one, and that makes sense. But this is something I think about sometimes, so I was just curious to get your opinion, especially because in these situations of protests, if it gets out of hand, if there's destruction of property, like you don't know if it's part of a protester or an anti-protester or just someone who wants to take advantage of the situation and looting. So I was curious if you, as a journalist, how much in people's minds is it to document people who are looting or breaking windows? And do you talk with the police and share your information, or do they get a hold of you, or does that come into play at all?
That's a really complicated and an excellent question. And remember what I just said about the reporters who had a dummy sound chip? So what happened with the cable reporters who were arrested is the police confiscated their equipment and I think demanded some of the footage, demanded the chips. And when they were bailed out, and they were people with a dummy chip, when they were bailed out, I think, if I'm not getting it all mixed up, they were able to get everything back. But I mean, I mentioned this in the previous workshop. One of the things that police all over the world do is demand your phone. Right? This is about, we're still talking about personal safety here. One of the things that police did that to some of the journalists and people that they arrested here too, demanding their phone. They want you to give them the code, right, to get in, and people refuse. They refuse. I mean, seriously, sit down with a piece of paper, decide what you're going to do, because you can. And if the police can get that footage, this is what will happen. It just disappears into a void. They don't put it on social media or anything. What they do is they look at the photographs, the images of people, and then they go figure out if they can figure out who they are, and then they go arrest them. That's another way that Portland police have used people's cell phones and their images. So it's complicated, and there's chaos is baked in, conflict is baked in. Yeah, I wish I had better answers. When you go to the pacificanetwork.org report the vote news training, and she's putting the materials up there that I really want to strongly encourage you to look at the slideshow about protest reporting, because it's illustrated with tweets. The slideshow is illustrated with tweets of journalists who were dealing with personal safety and chaos in real time. It's super interesting. I think it is. But honestly, you guys, we don't know what's going to happen. And I'll tell you right now, I have not seen very many stories about the protests at the Republican convention. And obviously what law enforcement is doing, and they probably have some kind of border patrol, board tech with them too, that we may have never heard of before, right? What they're doing is effective. So Babette, another thing you can do, and now you brought me to this place. There were a couple of key reporters in Portland who just tried to track who were the law enforcement that were there. And that was a really hard task. But it mattered. It did matter. Especially since when you have the FBI, you've got some militarized border control. God, what the hell is that? You've got your local police and you've got the sheriffs. I gotta tell you something that maybe nobody ever told you. Law enforcement bureaus, they don't like each other. Especially local bureaus, they don't like the FBI. They might all want to be on the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, but they don't get along. So really, actually, a news story where you just walked around the perimeter of the protest and tried to figure out who these officers were, that could be a story. It could also be a story to just write about how locked up it is. Right? Yeah. You guys, you're so freaking brave to be out there. You are. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about anything? Did you see I spent too much time on Twitter, right? And now it's X and people call it like Xitter, but pronounced like, anyway, whatever. Have you seen people talk about Blue Anon? It's all the people who are left of center who don't believe Donald Trump was really shot. And another thing to keep in mind, so I was just going to say, all my social media is filled with that, but social media shows you what it thinks you want to see. It doesn't show you what's actually in front of you, which is interesting. But I mean, this is a thing. And you might think about, I want you to look it up, Blue Anon. And I'm just
I
saying,
remember like from the very beginning when the incident happened that people were questioning whether or not it was real. That's funny how fast it became like has a name already.
right. When something like that happens, like somebody trying to assassinate a presidential candidate, you're not going to know what's going on for at least 24 hours. Just take it on faith. Anything that you see and hear is probably bullshit. Now, this is officially not a clean recording and we cannot air it on the radio. But anyway, yeah. Blue Anon. I'm also seeing a lot of conversations about JD Vance. And one of the things that has set the past decade apart in terms of elections coverage compared with the generations before is that there's so much lying that there's no baseline anymore for what piece of information can be backed up with evidentiary data, And that also is like JD Vance used to hate on Donald Trump. That used to be his brand. And I'm curious if other politicians or people running for office in your area of coverage are doing the same thing, right? But it is remarkable. I don't know if you read that book, Hillbilly Elegy. I read it. All of my ancestors are hillbillies on both sides of the family, Woohoo! And I thought that book was on the level. And then I read all the critiques of that book. Elizabeth Catte, Catte, is what's called a popular historian. And she's written a lot about Appalachia. She is Appalachian. And one of the things she talks about is the stereotype of a politician like JD Vance coming out and saying, basically saying Appalachia is a synonym for poverty. But it turns out that's not accurate, right? It's interesting. So I want you to also think in advance about, and I guess we're not talking about personal safety now, but think about what you're going to do when what you thought is reality is now being turned on its head. Because that's happening more and more. It's happening faster. It's almost like a climate change of the politics. I kept seeing people like, why didn't the New York Times ask Donald J. Trump to step down? Like the New York Times, they don't even know what to do about his lying anymore, right? So think about that. And we had talked in the fact-checking workshop about PolitiFact, the origins of PolitiFact. This one guy in a newsroom in Florida, he thought, how am I going to cover all this lying by these candidates? And he came up with a graphic that's actually what he came up with was a lot more loosey-goosey than what you see now, right? Anything else? We haven't heard from Gary, but I don't want to bug people. It's really nice to see Mr. Orozco too. It's nice to see you. I've got a book for you. I'm going to get him in the mail. If you guys want I think the book turned out really well. So just email me your snail mail address. And I lost one person's snail mail, right? What else? That's what I got today.
Looks
Oh,
like
Babette.
Babette, yeah.
You hear about the person who was shot. A black man shot, he had been arguing with someone, the police came. These were police on the perimeter of the area that's blocked off for downtown. This is way beyond downtown. This is on Fleet Street. And if you know Milwaukee, you're not in downtown really anymore. But you're just north of it. And he had been arguing and probably didn't even know the police were coming at him. They just came, tromp, 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 and they shot him. And that was the end of him. It just unbelievable to me. These folks were from Ohio. They didn't know a thing about Milwaukee, you know? And what are they doing policing Milwaukee? Just have to put that out there. There was a protest afterwards about it.
When was that?
That was like, I think the shooting was 2 days ago. The protest was yesterday.
Holy moly. Story. You guys, you know, we only have like a couple minutes left. One thing that I want to say to you, and I don't think anyone in journalism school is ever going to say this to you. Covering this stuff takes the tread off your heart. I had to go into therapy because I interviewed so many relatives of murdered people. That's for real. And, you know, someone is shot by law enforcement at the event that you're at. Take a moment and check in with yourself emotionally when that happens. Take a moment. And that's kind of also part of what I'm saying. Try to see the people around you as real people. And it's not easy. I know that sounds absurd, but it's not easy. The mayor of Portland is the worst politician. I'm saying this into a camera, the worst politician I've ever seen in my life. Okay. And he went down in 2020 to those protests and he got pepper sprayed by his own police and harassed by his own people. And, but I still try to see him as a person, right? It's better for you. Okay. And I'm so sorry that, these situations are so violent and I wish I had better news and a magic wand for you guys. Okay. Send me an email. Anyone send me an email. I'll send you my cell phone number. I love backing you up. I love supporting you. I love it when people contact me and ask questions. And the people who have, I really appreciate you. Okay. And I do appreciate you guys because what you're doing is supporting democracy. That sounds grandiose, but it's not at all. Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Have a nice, well, tomorrow we're just gonna do a talk about what's happening in the news and how it's gonna affect what you're doing. And I'll pull up some stories about Blue Anon. Okay. Anyway, thanks you guys.